Imagine you're walking down a busy street, people rushing by, cars honking, and life moving at its usual fast pace. Now, picture in the middle of that chaos, a man wealthy, confident, and dressed in an expensive tailored suit stopping in his tracks. This is Marcus, a successful black businessman with everything going for him. He's the type of guy who could walk past anyone without a second thought, too busy for small talk or distractions. But on this particular day, something catches his eye. Not something, but someone. Just ahead, standing on the corner, is an older white man, disheveled, confused, and clearly in need of help. His eyes dart back and forth, but they don't seem to focus on anything. He's blind, holding a cane, and struggling to navigate the sidewalk. People pass him without even noticing, too wrapped up in their own worlds. But not Marcus. For some reason, he can't just keep walking. Something inside him tells him to stop, to help, even though he has a million things to do. Marcus approaches the man cautiously. "Hey, are you all right?" he asks, his deep voice cutting through the noise of the street. The old man, whose name we later learn is Harold, turns his head toward the sound, relief flooding his face. I need to cross the street, but it's hard with all the noise. "I can't tell where I am," Harold says, his voice shaky. Now, Marcus could easily have pointed Harold in the right direction and moved on. But instead, he offers to help him across the street. They make their way slowly, Harold gripping Marcus's arm tightly, trusting a complete stranger in this chaotic city. As they walk, they begin to talk, and it's clear that Harold has had a hard life. He lost his sight in an accident years ago, and it's been a struggle ever since. But what Marcus doesn't expect is that Harold isn't just a man in need of help. He's someone with a past full of surprises. As they reach the other side of the street, Marcus is about to let go and continue his day, but something stops him. There's something about Harold, a sadness in his voice, that makes Marcus want to know more. He offers to sit with him for a bit, maybe grab a coffee. Harold is hesitant at first. After all, how often does a rich, well-dressed man offer to spend time with someone like him? But eventually, he agrees, and they head to a nearby cafe. What happens next is where the story takes an unbelievable turn. Marcus, who thought he was just offering a simple act of kindness, finds himself drawn deeper into Harold's life. As they sit in the cafe, sharing stories, Marcus realizes that this chance meeting isn't just a random act of kindness, it's fate. Harold reveals something about his past that shocks Marcus to his core, something so unexpected that it will change the way he sees everything. But I won't spoil that for you just yet. Let's just say, Marcus thought he was the one helping, but in the end, he might be the one who needs help. Stay tuned, because this story is just getting started, and you won't believe where it's headed next. As Marcus and Harold sat at the cafe, the sound of bustling customers and clinking cups filled the air. The two men couldn't have been more different on the surface. Marcus, with his polished appearance and confident demeanor. Harold with his worn-out clothes and eyes clouded by blindness. But beneath it all, there was something shared between them, a connection that neither of them could quite explain. Marcus sipped his coffee, glancing at Harold, who was carefully navigating his cup, feeling for the handle before taking a slow, measured sip. There was an air of quiet between them, not awkward but thoughtful. It was Marcus who broke the silence. "So, how long has it been?" Marcus asked softly. Since you lost your sight, I mean." Harold smiled faintly, his face lined with years of hardship and experience. "It's been about 10 years now. Happened in a car accident. One minute, I was driving home from work. The next, everything went black. They said I was lucky to survive, but I don't know if you can call this luck." He waved a hand in front of his face, though he couldn't see the gesture himself. Marcus nodded, feeling an unexpected pang of sympathy. It was hard to imagine losing something as essential as sight, the world you've always known suddenly snatched away. He wondered how Harold managed to keep going. "That must have been tough." "Tough doesn't even begin to cover it," Harold said with a chuckle, though there was no real humor in it. "At first, I was angry at the world, angry at myself, angry at whoever was driving that other car. But none of that changed the fact that I was blind. You learn to live with it though. Eventually, you stop feeling sorry for yourself. You just survive." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying Harold more closely. There was a strength in him, a resilience that Marcus couldn't help but admire. But he sensed there was more to the story. Something deeper. "And your family?" Marcus asked carefully. "Were they able to help you through it?" Harold's expression shifted at the mention of family. His face tightened, and for a moment, it seemed like he wouldn't answer. Marcus regretted asking, but then Harold spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "I don't have any family. Not anymore." Marcus felt the weight of those words. He had asked without thinking, assuming that everyone had someone to lean on in tough times. But clearly, Harold was alone in more ways than one. Marcus's heart went out to him, though he still felt there was something Harold wasn't saying. Something hidden behind his words. "I'm sorry to hear that," Marcus said, meaning it. "I didn't mean to pry." "It's all right," Harold replied, though there was a heaviness in his voice. "I've learned to get by on my own. People aren't always what you think they are. Sometimes when things get hard, the ones you think will stand by you are the first to leave." Marcus nodded, understanding more than Harold might have guessed. He had his own complicated history with family, and while his life might look perfect from the outside, there were things he didn't talk about. He didn't push Harold for more details, sensing that the man wasn't ready to reveal everything just yet. Instead, he shifted the conversation. "So, what do you do now? I mean, how do you get by?" Harold smiled again, but this time, there was a hint of pride behind it. "I do odd jobs here and there. Whatever I can manage. Some people think a blind man can't do much, but I've proven them wrong more times than I can count. I may not see, but I've got my ways of getting things done." Marcus chuckled. "I bet you do." For a while, they sat in comfortable silence, sipping their coffee. Marcus found himself strangely drawn to Harold's story, to his quiet strength, and the mystery surrounding him. He could tell that there was more to Harold's life than he was letting on. And then, almost out of nowhere, Harold said something that made Marcus freeze. "You remind me of someone," Harold said softly, his blind eyes staring straight ahead, as though seeing something Marcus couldn't. Marcus frowned. "Oh yeah? Who?" Harold didn't answer right away. Instead, he set his coffee cup down carefully, his fingers trembling slightly as they released the handle. "You remind me of my son." The words hit Marcus like a punch to gut. He hadn't expected that. "Your son?" he asked, confused. "I thought you said you didn't have family anymore." Harold nodded, his expression tight. "I did. He's gone now. We haven't spoken in years, not since. Well, not since everything fell apart." Marcus didn't know what to say. The conversation had taken a turn he hadn't anticipated, and the look on Harold's face made it clear that this was a subject close to his heart. Part of Marcus wanted to ask more, to find out what had happened between Harold and his son, but something told him that this wasn't the time to push. Instead, Marcus simply said, "I'm sorry. That must have been hard." Harold's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, Marcus thought he wouldn't respond. But then Harold spoke, his voice heavy with regret. "It was my fault. I wasn't the father I should have been. I made mistakes. Big ones. And by the time I realized it, it was too late." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He couldn't imagine what kind of mistakes Harold was talking about, but it was clear that whatever had happened, it still haunted him. Marcus wanted to offer some words of comfort, but before he could, Harold let out a long sigh and shook his head as though trying to shake off the weight of the past. "But that's life, isn't it?" Harold said, his voice suddenly lighter, though the sadness still lingered beneath the surface. "You live, you mess up, and you try to keep going. Some days, you even manage to do all right." Marcus nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to Harold's story. Something deeper and darker that he wasn't saying. As they sat there, finishing their coffee, Marcus couldn't help but feel like this meeting was more than just a coincidence. There was a reason he had stopped to help Harold, a reason their paths had crossed. And whatever it was, Marcus was starting to believe that it wasn't just Harold who needed help. Maybe, in some way, Marcus needed him too. But for now, the mystery of Harold's past and the story of his estranged son would have to wait. Marcus didn't know where this strange encounter would lead, but one thing was certain, he wasn't ready to walk away just yet. Little did Marcus know, the truth about Harold and his past was about to change everything. And when it came out, it would be more unbelievable than anything he could have imagined. The cafe was beginning to empty out, and the low murmur of conversations faded as people started to go about their day. Marcus glanced at his watch, realizing it was almost time for a meeting he couldn't miss. The encounter with Harold, though unexpected, had taken up more of his time than he had anticipated. And yet, he didn't feel like he could just walk away, not yet. Harold sat across from him, his face relaxed, but there was something still unsaid. Marcus felt a pull to know more, to understand man sitting before him, but just as he was about to ask another question, the old man's phone buzzed. Harold flinched slightly, his hand instinctively reaching for the device on the table. Marcus watched closely, noticing slight tremor in his fingers as he picked it up. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked, sensing a change in the air. Harold didn't answer right away. He stared at phone, his face turning pale. Marcus leaned in, a growing sense of concern building inside him. "Harold? What's wrong?" Finally, Harold exhaled sharply and put the phone back down, his hands resting on the table, tense and unmoving. His voice was tight, barely a whisper. "It's him," Harold said. "My son. He's trying to contact me again." Marcus felt a shiver run down his spine. The look in Harold's eyes was different now, panicked, as if something far more dangerous was on the horizon. Harold had already mentioned his son earlier, but Marcus hadn't realized the depth of the tension that still existed between them. And now, there was this phone call, one that clearly had a weighty impact on Harold. "Is everything all right?" "Should I?" Harold waved a hand dismissively. No, it's not all right," he said, his voice shaking. "My son, he's in trouble. Big trouble. And he needs me, but I can't help him." Marcus blinked, taken aback. "What kind of trouble?" Harold's eyes darkened, his entire demeanor shifting as if the weight of the world was pressing down on him. He looked out the window, almost as if searching for the right words. "It's not that simple," he began, his voice barely audible over the din of the cafe. "You see, when I lost my sight, everything changed. My son, he was the only family I had left. He was my world. And we had a bond stronger than anything else I've ever known. But something happened. He changed." Marcus could tell that this wasn't a simple family dispute. Harold's body was stiff with the tension of something deeper. He sat forward, his voice gentle but insistent. "Harold, what happened? You don't have to keep it a secret." For the first time since they'd met, Harold looked Marcus directly in the eyes. There was a deep sadness there, mixed with regret. He paused, letting the silence stretch between them, then finally spoke. "He got involved with the wrong people." "The wrong crowd," Harold said slowly, as if the words pained him to say. "After the accident, he changed. He stopped going to school, started hanging out with a rough group. They promised him they could make him powerful. He wanted to make something of himself, but he went about it the wrong way. Now, I'm scared for him." Marcus didn't know what to say. There was a tension in Harold's voice, a mix of fear and disbelief. It was clear that whatever had happened to Harold's son, it was far worse than just a wayward youth. Marcus could sense there was a darker, more dangerous side to the story. "So, what's the problem now?" Marcus asked. "Why hasn't he reached out to you until now?" Harold's expression grew more strained, and he leaned in closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "Because I'm afraid. I think he's gotten into something he can't get out of. Something that could get him hurt. Or worse." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? What kind of trouble are we talking about here?" Harold's hand trembled as he gripped his cane tightly. "He's in deep with some people. Dangerous people. The kind of people who don't just let things go. And he's been asking for my help, but I can't. I can't get involved. Not anymore." The atmosphere in the cafe grew heavy, the air thick with tension. Marcus felt like he was missing a piece of the puzzle. Harold wasn't just talking about a troubled son. He was talking about a situation far more dangerous than anything Marcus had expected when he'd stopped to help. There was something about the way Harold was acting now. Something that made Marcus wonder if Harold wasn't just a victim in this, but maybe a part of something much bigger, You're telling me he's gotten involved with criminals? Marcus asked, his brow furrowed in disbelief. Harold hesitated, then nodded solemnly. Worse. They don't just want money or power. They want control. And my son, he's a part of their plan. Marcus's mind raced as he tried to process what Harold was saying. Was this about organized crime? Some kind of dangerous underground operation? And how did Harold fit into all of this? He was just a blind man trying to live a quiet life, wasn't he? Before Marcus could voice his next question, Harold's phone buzzed again. Both men jumped at sudden sound. Harold picked it up reluctantly, and for a second time, his expression turned pale. As he stared at the screen, he swallowed hard, his breath shaky. It's him again, Harold whispered. Marcus's pulse quickened. What does he want? Harold shook his head, his fingers trembling as he typed out a reply. I don't know, but I'm afraid it's too late. He's gotten himself in too deep. Marcus could feel the tension between them, the unease gnawing at his gut. Harold was scared, more scared than Marcus had ever seen someone before. And whatever was going on, it was big. Bigger than either of them had realized. Suddenly, Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced down, startled to see a text message from his assistant. Marcus, we need you at the office now. The situation has escalated. It's urgent. His heart raced even faster. He glanced up at Harold, who was still glued to his phone, his eyes wide with panic. The urgency in Marcus's assistant's message felt like a sign the universe was pushing him towards something far greater than just a simple good deed. Something dangerous, something that could change everything. Harold, Marcus said, his voice steady but his mind whirling. I don't think we're done here. I need to know everything. What exactly is your son involved in? And what do these people want with him? Harold met his gaze for a moment, then looked down at his hands, his voice barely a whisper. It's not just him they want, Marcus. It's me too. The weight of his words hung in the air like a storm about to break. And for the first time since this all began, Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. Marcus's heart raced as he stared at Harold, absorbing the weight of his words. It wasn't just Harold's son who was in danger, it was Harold himself. Whatever had drawn Harold's son into this dark world was connected to something much bigger, something that reached into the very life Marcus had built for himself. Harold's hands shook as he clutched his cane. His eyes glossed over with the kind of fear that could only come from knowing there was no escape from the mess your life had become. His voice was soft, but the panic in it was unmistakable. They're after me, Marcus. They always have been. It's not just my son they want both of us. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Every instinct told him to run, to distance himself from this mess before it pulled him too deep. But something inside him, something stronger than reason, compelled him to stay. He had to help Harold, not just for the sake of a stranger, but because deep down, he knew that the pieces of this puzzle were tied to his own life in ways he couldn't yet understand. What do you mean they want you? Marcus asked, his voice low but urgent. Harold swallowed hard, then looked away, avoiding Marcus's gaze. He hesitated, the weight of what he was about to reveal almost too much to bear. Marcus, it's not just a coincidence that we ran into each other today. There's a reason I've been so wary, so careful with everything. My son, he's tangled up with people who have been watching me for years. Marcus's stomach dropped. What people? Who are they? Harold's voice trembled, his hand shaking as he finally revealed the truth. They're not just criminals, Marcus. They're part of a larger operation. They've been watching me for a long time, ever since I started investing in properties, real estate deals that I didn't even know were tied to them. I thought I was just getting ahead, but it turns out they were using me. They needed me to help them launder money, and when I refused, they started going after my son. Marcus's mind raced, trying to process the implications of Harold's words. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. A real estate operation, money laundering, and now an innocent man, caught up in something far beyond his control. But it didn't make sense. Why would they come after Harold now, after all this time? And more importantly, why had Marcus, of all people, been dragged into this? His thoughts were interrupted when Harold's phone buzzed again. Harold glanced at it quickly, his eyes widening. It's him, he muttered. His hand reached for the phone, but he hesitated. Marcus leaned in closer, his urgency growing. What does it say? What does he want? Harold swallowed, then read aloud, his voice shaking. Meet me at the old warehouse on 9th Street. You have 24 hours. Or, I'll make sure you both regret it. A cold wave of fear washed over Marcus. The message was clear. Whatever this was, it was spiraling fast, and Harold's son was still deep in the middle of it. And worse now, they were both in danger. Marcus stood up quickly, his mind racing. We don't have much time. We need to go there, figure out what's going on, and get your son before they do anything worse. Harold's face was pale, but he nodded. But it's not just about him, Marcus. They want us both, and we can't just run. We need to face this head on. Marcus didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket, his mind already working over the possibilities. He wasn't a man who dealt in these kinds of situations, but something told him that getting involved now was the only way out. He couldn't leave Harold to face whatever was coming alone. As they walked out of the cafe and into the evening light, Marcus's phone buzzed again. This time, it was an unknown number. He swiped to open it, his pulse quickening as he saw the message. Meet us alone, or say goodbye to your friend. It wasn't just Harold's life on the line anymore, it was his own. Whoever these people were, they were more powerful and dangerous than he could have imagined. He looked at Harold, his expression grim. Who are they, Harold? Marcus asked, feeling the weight of the situation bearing down on him. How deep does this go? Harold shook his head. I don't know, Marcus. But they know who you are too. This isn't just about me. It's about something else. Something bigger. Marcus's mind reeled as they approached the warehouse, its silhouette looming ahead, abandoned and shrouded in darkness. The warehouse was eerily quiet, the air thick with tension. They stopped just outside the entrance, both of them pausing to catch their breath. Marcus looked at Harold one last time. We go in together, he said, determined. Harold nodded, though he seemed just as nervous as Marcus felt. They stepped forward, the door creaking open slowly as they entered the dimly lit space. The smell of dust and oil lingered in the air, and the silence was almost deafening. As they moved deeper inside, Marcus's phone buzzed once more. He checked it, his heart sinking as he read the message. Turn around, Marcus. He spun around, his breath catching in his throat as he saw them. Two men, dressed in black suits, standing just a few feet away, their faces obscured by shadows. Harold gasped, his body freezing up. It's them, he whispered. The taller of the two men stepped forward, his expression unreadable. You shouldn't have come, he said, his voice calm and dangerous. Marcus's mind raced. What could they want? What had they been hiding all this time? And then, just as Marcus was about to speak, the second man who had been standing behind the first stepped forward, revealing something that left Marcus in shock. It was a familiar face. His own. His identical twin. Marcus's heart stopped. The man before him, his brother, was the one behind everything. The twist was unbearable. All the tension, all the mysteries, all the dangers, it was all connected to him, to Marcus, and the life he thought he knew. He stared at his twin, unable to comprehend how this was even possible. Surprised, Marcus? His twin said, his smile cold and mocking. You should be. After all, you've been living the life I was supposed to have. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. How could this be happening? His twin had been out of his life for years. He thought he'd been dead, lost in a tragic accident that had never been resolved. And yet here he stood, alive, with a cruel smile on his face. Harold, now just stunned as Marcus, glanced between the two men. Marcus? What? What is this? Marcus's twin stepped closer, his gaze never leaving Marcus. It's simple, really. All these years, I've been waiting for the right moment to take what's mine. Your life, your success, it was always meant to be mine. And now that you're here, we can finally settle this. Once and for all. The weight of the situation pressed down on Marcus like a ton of bricks. Everything he had known, everything he had believed about his past and his future was unraveling before him. His brother wasn't just some long-lost relative, he was the mastermind behind everything. The crimes, the threats, and the danger, it was all a twisted plan to take everything Marcus had built. And now, Marcus had to face him, or risk losing it all. The tension in the room was palpable, and Marcus knew the next moments would determine everything. But as his brother stepped closer, a chilling thought struck him: how far would this man go to take what he wanted? And more importantly, would Marcus survive this confrontation long enough to stop him? The answers would come soon. But Marcus had no idea just how much darker this story was about to get. Marcus stood frozen, staring at the man who had just revealed himself to be his twin brother. The shock, the disbelief, it was overwhelming. Everything that had seemed so certain about his life was now in question. His brother, the one he had thought was dead, the one he had mourned years ago, was standing before him, alive and well, with a cruel smile on his face. "Why, Marcus?" his brother asked, his voice cold and calculated. "Why did you take everything that was supposed to be mine?" Marcus felt a wave of anger rise in him, mingled with fear. His brother had betrayed him in ways he couldn't have imagined. And now, standing in front of him, it felt like the world was crumbling. Harold, who had been standing beside Marcus, was still in shock. He was unable to comprehend how this could be happening, but Marcus knew that this was bigger than just Harold. This was about his entire life, the life he had worked so hard to build, the life he had thought he deserved. "Why did you do this?" Marcus managed to choke out. "Why fake your own death? Why come back now?" His brother's eyes darkened, and a twisted grin formed on his lips. "You always thought you could just waltz into life and take what you wanted, didn't you?" he sneered. "You got everything I was supposed to have: the money, the success, the power. You took my place, Marcus. You stole my life. And now, I'm here to take it back." The words cut deeper than Marcus expected. He had never known his brother to be this vengeful, this obsessed. He had been led to believe that his twin had died in a car accident years ago, that he had been the only survivor of a terrible tragedy. But now, standing here in the dimly lit warehouse, with the weight of his brother's anger pressing down on him, he realized how wrong he had been. His brother wasn't dead. He had faked his death, hidden himself away, and let Marcus carry the burden of guilt all these years. Harold stepped forward, his voice shaking. "We don't need to do this. You don't have to go down this path. There's always a way out." He was clearly trying to defuse the situation, but it was no use. The tension in the air was so thick, it was almost suffocating. Marcus, still reeling from the revelation, glanced around the warehouse, trying to think of a way out. But it was clear that his brother was ready for this. He had planned everything. The danger was real, and the threat was immediate. "You don't understand," Marcus said, his voice low but firm. "You've been living in the shadows for so long that you've forgotten what it means to live in the light. I worked hard for everything I've built, and I didn't take anything that was yours. I didn't know you were even alive." His brother's expression twisted with rage. "I don't care about your excuses anymore. You don't deserve what you have. I should have been the one to have it all. You can't just take my life and think I'll sit back and let it happen. I won't." The anger in his brother's voice was terrifying, but Marcus wasn't about to back down. He had already lost too much. He wasn't going to let this man, this stranger, who shared his blood, take away everything he had worked for. "I don't care about the past anymore," Marcus said, his voice steady, though his heart was racing. "What I care about is the future. We don't have to keep doing this. There's still a way out. You don't have to keep living this way." His brother let out a bitter laugh. "You're so naive, Marcus. You always have been. You think I care about your future? All I care about is taking back what's mine." Marcus knew then that reasoning with his brother was pointless. He had made up his mind. And if Marcus didn't stop him now, things were going to get much worse. The air between them crackled with tension, and Marcus could feel the threat looming, as real as the beating of his own heart. Without warning, his brother reached into his jacket, pulling out a gun and aiming it directly at Marcus. The sight of it sent a shiver down Marcus's spine. This was no longer just a confrontation, it was life or death. Harold gasped, stepping back, but Marcus stood his ground. He wasn't going to let fear control him now. "You don't want to do this," Marcus said, his voice firm but calm. "There's still a way to fix this. But you need to put the gun down and think." His brother's hand wavered slightly, his expression conflicted. For a brief moment, it seemed like the reality of the situation was sinking in. But then, just as quickly, his brother's anger flared again. "You took my life from me, Marcus. You made your choice. Now I'll make mine." The gun went off, and Marcus barely had time to react. He felt the sharp pain in his shoulder, a searing heat that spread quickly. He fell to the ground, clutching his shoulder as the blood started to pour out. The world around him blurred, and his vision dimmed. Harold screamed, rushing to Marcus's side. "We need to get out of here," Harold shouted, trying to help Marcus to his feet. But Marcus was weak, the pain overwhelming him. He could barely stay conscious, let alone escape. His brother stepped forward, still holding the gun, his face twisted with rage. "You should have stayed out of this, Marcus. This is your fault." Marcus, despite the pain, gritted his teeth and pushed himself to his knees. "It's not over," he said, his voice low but determined. "You won't win." In the distance, Marcus heard a noise. It was faint at first, but growing louder. The sound of approaching sirens. He knew that help was on the way, but he wasn't sure if he would make it in time. His brother's face twisted with frustration. "It's too late for you, Marcus. You don't have a way out. This is where it ends." Just as Marcus's vision started to darken, a figure appeared at the entrance of the warehouse. It was a police officer, followed by a team of officers, rushing in with their weapons drawn. They had come just in time. Marcus's brother hesitated, the gun lowering slightly as he turned to face the new threat. The police were there to stop him, to end the madness. His brother's face went pale, realizing that his time was running out. The standoff was brief. His brother dropped the gun, surrendering to the authorities. The police moved in quickly, cuffing him and reading him his rights. It was over. As the officers helped Marcus to his feet, he let out a deep breath, his body trembling with pain and exhaustion. Harold was right by his side, still in shock, but relieved to see Marcus alive. The paramedics arrived, tending to Marcus's wound, but his mind was still racing. He couldn't believe what had just happened. His brother, his own flesh and blood, had tried to take everything from him. And for what? Power? Revenge? Marcus glanced at Harold, who was looking at him with a mix of concern and gratitude. "Thank you," Harold said softly. "I never would have made it without you." Marcus gave him a small nod. "I didn't do it for thanks, Harold. I did it because you're more than just a stranger. You're a person who needed help, and that's all that matters." As the paramedics loaded Marcus into the ambulance, he realized that this whole ordeal had changed something inside him. He had gone from being the man who had everything to someone who was vulnerable, someone who had to fight for his life. And in that fight, he had discovered who he truly was. But as the ambulance doors closed, Marcus's thoughts drifted back to his brother. He had never imagined that their paths would cross in such a way, that their lives would become so intertwined. He couldn't help but wonder if there was something more to the story, something deeper that he would never fully understand. For now, though, all that mattered was that he was alive, and he had made it through. As the ambulance sped away from the warehouse, the sound of the sirens gradually fading into the distance, Marcus closed his eyes and let out a deep sigh. It was over. Or at least, he hoped it was. But one thing was certain: this was a chapter of his life he would never forget. And as the story came to a close, Marcus knew that he had emerged from the darkness stronger than he had ever been before. He was no longer just a man with wealth and power. He was a survivor, someone who had been through the worst and lived to tell the tale.